This is something I've been meaning to discuss for a while now. A few of you who pop into my Discord know it's been in the works for a few weeks. The topic in question is the technical side of frame rates, frame rendering, and input latency. I don't expect this to be easily digestible for everybody, but I do hope at the very least I can try and teach you something in the next 15 minutes. There's been a constant debate in the For Honor community about a very particular subject. That subject is the notion that consoles require 60 FPS, and that the difference between 60 FPS and 30 FPS is the entire reason why consoles feel different from PC. I want to discuss why this may not be the exclusive reason for consoles feeling different. So first off, a common point I see is 30 FPS means attacks are faster. This is not true. Remove that concept from your head before we continue. You get less visually smooth animations, but the start and end points are all within the same minor deviation. It does not matter. Current display technology hasn't quite gotten a hold on time bending yet. Perhaps LG might announce something next year. As you can see by the graphic on screen, regardless of the frame rate, the animation starts and ends at the same frame, but simply looks less smooth with less in between. The absolutes are still the same. I also want to get out of the way that people believe all PC players can react perfectly to 333 millisecond attacks. Those are not intended to be reactable, and for the vast majority of PC players, they are indeed not reactable. With that, no number of frames is going to change you from a slow reaction person to a fast reaction person. You can train yourself to be better, and I'm not going to argue that a higher frame rate won't help you, but it's not the only factor that's going to be contributing to your reaction times. That being said, there's a much larger problem on consoles which ties into 30 FPS that a lot of people don't seem to discuss. That large problem is input latency, which directly impacts how fast you can react, as any inputs you make will be delayed by this much. The average person reacts anywhere from 240 to 280 milliseconds to visual stimuli, as per roughly 75 million reaction tests done by humanbenchmark.com. That means the best case scenario with zero input latency, you are looking at somewhere around 250 milliseconds of delay from reacting to something on screen when the attack goes out. If you were this perfect, that 333 millisecond attack would be consistently blocked. The problem with that is there's also a delay on controls. That's the area I wanted to discuss. Before we get into the raw data here, one thing I want to establish is a common terminology. We've all heard of buffering and have encountered that annoying spinning circle at some point in our life. With graphics, there's a thing called a frame buffer. This is where graphics are drawn before presenting on screen. With a PC, what you usually have is a frame buffer referred to as a single buffer. A single buffer is exactly what it sounds like. There's no delay. It simply takes what the GPU is doing right then at that point in time and puts it on your screen as soon as the screen is willing to take it. This means the least latency between when the picture is made and when you get to see it. When you're dealing with latency, having to wait at all at any point in time is obviously going to increase the total time taken. There is, however, additional technologies beyond the single buffer that offer different perks, aptly named the zero buffer, the double buffer, and finally the triple buffer. For those familiar, zero buffer and single buffer are usually interchangeable and simply referred to as VSync off. Both will operate near identical and depends entirely on the game engine and screen as to how it's handled. From there, we have our other two technologies, the double buffer and the triple buffer. These are typically used in pair with systems such as VSync to deliver frames at an even pacing without any of the dreaded screen tearing, or even to improve overall performance in some cases. This improves your visual quality at the cost of latency. With a double buffer, graphics are first drawn to the back buffer and then moved to the front buffer when the last drawn frame has been displayed. This delivers smooth, evenly paced, full frames, thus preventing any torn or half-drawn frames, but it also limits your game to a divisible number of your monitor's refresh rate, resulting in a potential loss of performance. The technology behind a triple buffer is similar. However, instead of just a front buffer and a back buffer, it utilizes two back buffers. With two back buffers, triple buffer is allowed to always draw a new frame, even if the last drawn frame hasn't been pushed out to the front buffer and displayed on screen. This negates the performance penalty from a double buffer in terms of frame rate and input latency. This does slightly degrade the even frame pacing, but it allows you to always have a tear-free perfect frame with very little impact to performance. For the sake of time, I won't go into too much detail, but as the name implies, this often adds an additional 2 frames of delay instead of just 1 frame of delay from double buffering. This is both a pro and a con, giving you a higher frame rate and the ability to run at odd frame rates, for example 50 FPS at 60Hz, while causing more input latency if you're always at 60 FPS 60Hz. Now, what I hypothesized is that the console version of For Honor is not only running at 30 FPS, but it is also using a buffer technology, increasing the input latency beyond what is inherent to the console. We can see evidence of this from Digital Foundry's analysis of the PS4 version of the game. I don't own a console myself, so I can't test it here. However, my hypothesis does line up with what some of the community members have shared in their own thoughts, or have shared with me from what I've asked. Those thoughts being that the game feels different due to factors other than frame rate, even on a good display. Specifically, the key being good display, from what I'm about to discuss. I've also used third-party data for other games as a general guide, which have consistently shown the PS4 to be up to 4 frames delayed from their PC counterparts. This just adds to what we're talking about here. Outside of the game itself, there's significant factors too. If you game on an older TV, you have higher input latency than a monitor. Some high-end TVs these days are awfully close, but you're still looking at double to triple high-end monitors. If you game on a TV that's not set to game mode, you are gimping it further. Both of those things can be heavily improved upon to help your gaming system just be that much better, and these factors will be adding on top of what we're talking about here too, but I cannot account for all the external factors. Let's get into the discussion point then, and maybe help promote some better discussion in the For Honor community. This does reach out to every game on all platforms as something worth knowing, as it is a pretty universal standard that input latency is something that's going to affect you. What I've done is I've gone ahead and tested 30 FPS versus 60 FPS versus roughly 180 FPS. The reason for the arbitrary 180 is that's just what I can sustain with a reasonable amount of error, meaning I'm at or above 180 almost all of the time, allowing for me to properly test this thing. My hope is that I can provide a little bit of understanding as to how frame rate actually affects things. My testing methodology. I am capturing my high-end monitor using a high frame rate camera to capture both my screen and a key press at the same time. I then go in frame by frame and mark the first frame where my keyboard spacebar has hit the activation point. I then go to the first frame where the stamina bar has visible stamina consumption from the dodge, which is the first frame where the game has registered my input. Following this method allows for the least amount of potential variance as to what's happening in-game, which will provide the most accurate data. This method does have some margin of error due to my reliance on my own eyeballs. However, this margin of error is roughly half a frame at 240 FPS, or about 2 milliseconds. From other tests, margin of error is considered relatively minor at anywhere from 1 to 4 milliseconds. So my test's 2 millisecond margin of error falls directly in line with this. And honestly, if I had the means to do a more thorough test on this, I probably wouldn't be spending my time making videos about For Honor. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first point of data on this chart. We have 144 Hz, 180 FPS, with no frame buffering. This gives us an input latency value of 33.33 milliseconds, which is precisely 1 frame at 30 FPS. The next best result we have is 60 Hz at 180 FPS with 42 milliseconds. This adds roughly half a frame at 60 Hz. Part of the reason for it being half a frame is occasionally I would get the dodge activated 1 frame early or 1 frame late, averaging it out to being early. The next bit would be testing 60 Hz 60 FPS with no frame buffering. And with this, we do get our half a frame delay back. This pushes us closer to a full 60 FPS frame slower than 180 FPS. So having a higher frame rate does decrease your input latency, however it is not significant. After establishing that baseline, we can dig into the part of the discussion that tends to get sidelined, frame buffering. Consoles handle it differently, so I've gotten as close as I can on a PC. Looking at the results here, we can see 60 Hz 60 FPS buffered has a 67.88 milliseconds delay, actually causing it to have more delay than the unbuffered 30 FPS does. It's very close, but nonetheless, it is worse. And lastly, what happens if you go all the way down to the worst case scenario of 30 FPS that's been buffered? If we go to that worst case scenario, we're all the way up to 80 milliseconds of delay, and potentially even higher depending on how bad your display is. As I stated before, I don't have a console to test myself, but I do have a pretty bad TV. When testing that, I was seeing anywhere from 160 to 200 milliseconds of delay at 60 FPS. That's a significant, game-breaking delay, and it's sadly not something you can usually fix for free. Some TVs offer something called game mode, which if you don't currently have enabled, please do yourself a favor and go enable it when you're playing a game. On some TVs, this can take anywhere from 50 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds off from your display input latency at the cost of a minor downgrade in picture quality. This is going to be an absolute game changer for you if you're not already doing it. So go ahead and check that out. You'll find this under the picture settings for your display, and if you're having trouble finding it, just Google how to enable game mode on X, where X is your TV model. There's also a small bit of latency inherent to the consoles themselves, as we touched on before, which again, I cannot test directly myself. Despite that, others on the internet have done their own tests with some of the better games out there. We are typically seeing 1 to 4 frames of delay at 60 FPS 60Hz compared to their PC brethren. So if we wanted to approach it that way, we could add anywhere from 16 to 66 milliseconds of latency simply because you're playing on a console. Again, that's not something you can change for free, and that's a real disappointment here, and why frame rate, or more directly, input latency, is an important problem that should be addressed. A lot of people out in the community seem to simply want to proclaim 60 FPS is the be-all and end-all fix with For Honor. Nonetheless, as denoted by my graphs, if they don't improve latency elsewhere, there's not an awful lot that's going to change getting 60 FPS. For those of you who are on PC who haven't quite tuned me out yet, one thing to be aware of is borderless windowed mode. If you don't have an adaptive sync monitor, FreeSync or G-Sync, you'll be automatically buffering your frames with DWM, Desktop Window Manager, which is built into Windows, even if you have your in-game settings set to VSync off. If you want the best latency possible, you should be playing in full screen exclusive mode with VSync off, or if you can't stand screen tearing and you can hold over 60 FPS, set your display to double buffered with full screen exclusive mode. If you have a G-Sync or FreeSync enabled display, that will take control over DWM, disabling its buffering on your game's borderless windowed mode, and that means you can enjoy the ability to alt-tab easily with the low latency of no buffering. Perfect. That wraps up most of this topic then. I don't think I have a complete solution for consoles, but at the very least it provides an insight deeper than just frame rate. Hopefully you understand at least a little bit of what the hell a frame buffer is and why input latency matters after all the rambling for the last 12 minutes. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you for listening. I hope you have a great day, and science kinda sucks.